Hi, I'm Andrew Grill. I'm the practical futurist, and I'm coming up on Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, where we'll examine what is a practical futurist, why you need to think like a startup, and what the workplace of the future is likely to be. Coming up next.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Barron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us here on Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty Leadership Interview Series, where today we're going to look at the practicality of finding and embracing the future in all of its disruptive glory. If you're a new listener, new viewer to the show, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc. magazine as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And GNA also cited us as the top 10 podcast for HR pros and employers. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's get into it. Strap yourself in. We're about to dive in. Watching, listening to this show, you are either a high-level executive, an entrepreneur, a sales leader, or a leader in some capacity. And as a leader, you know that there are certain things that you might not like, but you have to embrace. For example, you might own a fleet of taxi cabs, and you could choose to cling to the old and go down faster than the Titanic, or you can embrace the change. But let's face it, disruption, even if you're the one creating it, is messy. But of course, if you had a crystal ball with which you could see where things were going, you could be practical about the adaptation so you can get the most out of whatever the disruption is. Well, my guest today is a man who speaks to audiences around the world on this very subject of being practical about your future. Andrew Grill is the practical futurist. He's an internationally renowned thought leader. Andrew is an expert in the fields of digital transformation, digital strategy, and social media networks, and speaks to and consults with organizations worldwide to develop their strategies in a world rife with digital disruption. An experienced corporate leader, Andrew has launched and run technology companies in Europe, Australia, and has worked with some of the world's leading companies and organizations, including Vodafone, IBM, Nestle, British Airways, Barclays Bank, BBC, American Express, John Lewis, Unilever. He's also a seasoned TEDx speaker, having presented at 3 separate TEDx events. Andrew regularly contributes to a wide range of media outlets, including The Drum, Changeboard, ANZ, Blue Notes. He's appeared several times on Sky News and has been published in the Financial Times, The Telegraph, and The Guardian. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Andrew Grill. Crowd goes wild. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, Dov. How are you?
I'm
Coming
good,
to you
mate.
live here from London, England. How are you?
Good, mate. It's good to have you here on the show with us. So we should sort of let people in that you and I do know each other because we spoke together in Iran.
Of all places, I mean, I love the thing about serendipity. You just never know where you're going to be and who you're going to meet. And inbounded this unbridled bundle of enthusiasm, Dov, one evening off the plane, and we instantly hit it off and became mates. So I was thrilled when you wanted me to come on the show and extend one of the many chats, including the chat we had in that taxi when we were being whisked through the streets of Tehran at high speed. I think we both became firm friends there because we weren't quite sure if we're going to make it to the hotel or not.
Yeah, there's something about facing death that bonds people.
Yeah, and I thought the video you took of me reacting was probably the priceless one that, of course, will never go on the web.
Yeah, this is just to tell you folks, this moment we're in this cab going through Tehran with this guy who is eating his lunch, pouring tea, singing and bouncing on his on his steering wheel as if and dancing while we're in the back. And he's driving at the highest possible speed you could even imagine, missed like the cars in front of him are this far away. And meanwhile, Andrew and I are in the back, and Andrew's seatbelt doesn't quite work, so he's got it kind of around him, and he's pumping the brake. When I look at him and go, Andrew, there is no brake in the back, particularly on that side.
Yeah.
It was
an experience. It was an experience.
Definitely an
you and I speak all around the world, and we've got a story in every city that we speak in.
That was another version of disruption.
Yeah, I was hoping. I think we both worked out that the lines on the road, they're optional. The lanes
on the road, speed limits, any sign is merely a suggestion.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So tell us. Let's jump in at the beginning here and tell us what it means to be a practical futurist. I think some people, think about practicality. They think about futurist. They're also not two words that normally go together. And I know, because we've shared the stage together, that they do come together very well. Tell us tell our listeners, our viewers, what you mean by a practical futurist.
Yeah, deliberately put the word practical at the front because it makes you think. There are so many futurists out there. They're fantastic. A lot of them are my peers. I speak with them at conferences as well. But they like telling you what's going to happen in 5, 10, 15 years' time. Now, most of the people in my audience are the sort of people that listen to your show. They're executives. They're senior in their role in their career, and they can't wait 5 or 10 years. They want to know what's happening next week, next month, or next quarter. So by being a practical futurist, I deliberately give them things to go away with. So I challenge them. If I'm speaking on a Wednesday, I say, next Thursday in your team meeting, here are the things you need to bring up, the things you need to start disrupting your own organization before a competitor disrupts you. So by putting the word practical at the front, it really means they leave the room, they leave the venue with a list of things that they can action tomorrow. And the feedback has been, look, Andrew, thank you. I needed a push to start doing this, and I needed you to challenge me to really go back next week with something actionable.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I mean, a lot of that disruption idea can be, it's easy for us to get excited about it and go, I remember when I was a kid and one of my teachers, my science teacher saying, by the year 2000, by the year 2000, which is now looking back in time, but by the year 2000, nobody will eat meals, we'll take pills for food, and we'll have places on the moon, and some people will choose to live on the moon, and we'll all have our own personal flying cars. Well, it's very exciting as an idea, but it's science fiction, it's not practical. And, one of the things I loved about watching you speak, and as you know, I was there for both of your presentations, is here's the practicality of it today. Yes, it's going to grow exponentially, but here's what you can do with it today. And really all that comes down to this word that has become, part of the modern lexicon, which is this word disruption. And I think that you look at disruption a little differently than a lot of the people out there who speak about disruption and certainly speak about futurist stuff. Tell us what disruption means to you.
Well, when you say disruption in that sort of way, it can sound negative. And sometimes people will say, well, Andrew, if you talk about disruption and things breaking, is it a negative? If you flip it around, it can be digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing whole industries, whole ways of life and being disrupted because these upstarts, these Ubers, these Airbnbs, these fintech companies are getting in there. They don't have the legacy of tens or hundreds of years of being in business and all these processes. They act and think very much like a startup because they are that. Now, I'm a bit different. I spent the last 12 years before IBM in startups, so I know what it's like to run a lean organization, to have to be very agile, to have almost no money for promotion and having to rely on influencers and getting the message out there through non-traditional ways. Mm-hmm. And so when I advise clients what they need to do, often they're a large client, they're an airline, they're a bank, they're a pharmaceutical company that have been around for years and years and years. And they actually don't know how to get out of their own way.
Right.
And so sometimes you just have to break the parcel up. And for example, one thing I spoke about on stage was the need for digital diversity. Now, we talk about gender diversity on boards, and
Yes.
I want to take it to another level where you actually look at the composition of your board and you look at diversity of thought. And can not one, but can two of your board members see the company through a digital lens? I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
Proposal comes
please.
up to the board to put in a new cloud platform. It's going to cost $5 million. The non-digital board says, sounds like a lot of money. I suppose it's right. The management team, we trust them. But a digitally enabled board then says, well, hang on, is it hybrid or public? What are the encryption protocols being used? Where will the data be kept? And they actually ask questions that allow you to have a better business decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a simple example of how to disrupt your own organization. It's not tearing it apart. It's not breaking it down. It's allowing you to think in a very lateral way. And like I said, think like a startup.
That's an interesting term, really, right there, isn't it? I mean, you said you're dealing with, British Airways, a big pharmaceutical company, big banks, or whatever it might be. But I put myself in the shoes of one of those organizations, and you go, think like a startup. I'm like, are you on crack? Like, this thing is bigger than the Titanic, and you're asking me to turn it like it's a cigar speedboat. How do for those who are listening, watching, who are driving the Titanic in their industry, what's the first step for them in a practical way around starting to think like a startup?
Well, you've got to look at what things can you actually change. I think I would be laughed out of the room if I stood up and said, you've got to think like a startup and you can do things very quickly. You can't, because the way your company has grown, all the things that get tacked on, all the systems that you have, all the processes, they're hardwired in there. So sometimes you actually have to maybe set up a separate division, actually have a skunk works that's given the budget, the approval and the runway to actually deconstruct parts of your business that need to go online. I mean, let's look at another example. If I said to you 25 years ago that you'll be able to transact your banking business on your mobile phone, you would have said, no way, it can't be secure. People will, lose their money. And it happens today. It's now become the norm. And in fact, the bank I choose, one of the first things I think about is how flexible are they? Do I have to go into a branch, or can I do things my way? And so if you've got, bank's a good example. They have, they're regulated. They handle money, so you don't want that going missing. But at the same time, they can set up a part of the organization to say, okay, if we're to digitize a part of the organization, let's say account balances, okay, how do we safely put that online on a mobile and allow that to happen? I mean, it's all possible. And the other thing in thinking like a startup and being agile is that you can't spend months and months and months doing development, not knowing whether it's going to work. And so the agile methodology that software developers use, where there are sprints every 2 weeks, they basically get together, they look at the components of the problem they've solved and how much they're programmed. You can then take them into an organization. So let's say, okay, we've got to change the travel policy. We're going to do a wide change to the whole organization, but let's do it in pieces so that as the changes go out, we get feedback. We get feedback from the employees of whether it's going to work, rather than, it's all secret and then on day X we decide to change something overnight. And guess what? It doesn't work because we haven't thought about some of the ways that our consumers, our employees actually use the service. So the notion of breaking these things up into, bite-sized, manageable chunks is what startups do. And I think big businesses are scared because, they think they might lose control.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. That whole thing around leadership, control. So you've got leadership / control. You've got a workforce and you've got a culture, and those things, certainly in old school leadership, seems like opposite sides. And when really, as we lead now in the present, we've got to lead from a very different place than that. I mean, the workplace has already changed dramatically, but the workplace of the future is going to be even more different. Talk to us about what you see there, about the changes in the workplace. What do you see moving forward? Because for me, one of the things I'm seeing when I look at this, and I've discussed this before, is that companies, older companies that are more established are looking at newer companies and saying who's doing well, and they go, well, Google, they have table tennis and they have pinball machines and they have beer on Friday and pizza, and maybe we should do all that. And I'm like, Jesus, that is not it. That is so not it. But they think that that's it. Help us understand the workplace of the future and how some of these titanic companies can help have their employees help adapt to the change in the nature of work in the way it is right now.
That's a really broad thing to unpack. So let's sort of take it into little pieces. So the workplace of the future will look and feel different. And I'm not suggesting for a moment it's all going to be table tennis and beer, but that's about culture. And if you want to attract new staff, the millennials coming out of colleges now, and this is Gen Y and Gen Z, they have different expectations.
Absolutely.
Let's look at one element of collaboration. So people that are of a younger age don't know a time without the internet, and they probably don't know a time without Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook. So they expect to be able to communicate with their friends and family in a collaborative way, and they go to work and everything's shut down. So what I've seen firsthand in my own organization and those of my clients is those that allow you to collaborate actually get work done in a more efficient way. And this starts at the top as well. You mentioned about the leadership. So in the old days, if you had a complaint, there's no way you would email the CEO because he or she would have someone blocking that and you would never get through. But in the workplace of the future, the ability to talk to anyone using an internal social network is there. And the leader, the CEO of the future, he or she says, I actually crave feedback. I want you to criticize what we're doing, but I want you to be constructively critical. And also I want you to be constructively critical on the internal company network so we can actually analyze what you're saying.
Right.
It's not Big Brother watching you. Great example at IBM. There was a guy called Max Black. He's a 25-year-old consultant in New York, and he put an expense claim in for an Uber taxi ride a couple of years ago, and it was denied. Now, being a millennial, rather than going to his manager saying, I'm really upset about this, he went to our internal platform and he started a petition. And he had thousands and thousands of people saying, this isn't right. Why is Uber being banned? And because the complaint was handled on our internal network, not only did everyone else see it and they could contribute and say, yeah, I've had the same problem, but the senior leadership team, and Diane Gershon, who's our chief HR officer at IBM, she saw the complaint, looked into it, and responded online internally as her. No legal S. It was, look, it's Diane here. Hey, Max, I'm sorry to hear about the problem. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. We'll look into it. The next day, the policy was changed. So someone 25 years old, fairly junior in the organization, could affect the policy at a Fortune 500 company. Now, when I explain that story, in fact, I've videoed Max. I've got him on tape, and I show him at my seminars. And clients go, that would never happen here. I'm saying, you're probably right, but in 3 or 4 years' time, it has to happen because you need to provide an environment where people can contribute. Here's something really important. Your value to an organization isn't what you know, it's what you share. The old days, we'd hold information tight to our chest. We don't want people to know because that gives us our power. But in the new organization, what you share is the value you bring to an organization. So you might be struggling with a problem. It might be you've got to answer a client query, or you're not quite sure about some technical specification. You don't know who to ask. Who do you call? You put out a call on the internal network, just as you would on Twitter or Facebook with your friends, and someone in a far-flung part of the company that you'd never heard of says, I can help you.
Right.
That is one of the components of the workplace of the future, where it is open and collaborative. And I'm sure people listening use things like Slack and Chatter and Yammer and IBM products as well. But 9 times out of 10, unless there's an associated culture change, unless people say, yes, we want you to communicate, but this has got to unlock the power of the organization rather than just, being, we have to communicate or we have to put things on the Slack channel. That's just one of a number of things that I think will define the workplace of the future.
Yeah, I think, but what you just said there for me is a really great practicality in that, again, IBM is one of those Titan-size companies. It's it is massive. And yet, here's this internal network that people can communicate on, and as a result, something changed as if it was a cigar speedboat. So that's what I like about what you're saying about that.
Exactly.
think like a startup. You can't make the entire thing that way, but you can work on all the different little pieces in different ways. And I think that is a very powerful way for people to grasp. Now, you and I talked about this. We both spoke about it from different places on stage when we were speaking at the World Business Forum. And we talked about how if you're going to have your people be loyal to you, if you're going to have your people stick with you, one of the old school things was to try and get the customer to be loyal and then tell their friends. And one of the things that both that you and I spoke about was actually, no, it's actually your employees that you need to have become the advocates for you, that you need to become the evangelical for your company. Talk to us about that from your point of view, so that somebody in that world, because it's embedded that, the customer is most important. And I've argued, and I know you have too, is that actually your culture and the people you take care of is the most important, because the customer comes out of that. Talk to us about it from your point of view.
I read this quote yesterday. I think it was Simon Sinek or someone that it's attributed to, that in this order is important: people, customers, shareholders.
Right.
I think it's absolutely critical. If you go to work and you're not feeling valued or you're not feeling useful, then you're not going to be very useful. What I did before IBM, I ran a company called Cred that looks at social media influence. So I've spent a lot of time looking at the notion of influencers. And there are lots of companies around there, probably a lot of people listening to this podcast, that also employ influencers. You pay them some money, they wear your shirt, they drink your cola, they drive your car, and they hopefully talk about it on social media, and you get reach. And it really bugs me, because a lot of companies spend hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of dollars on these influencers.
Yep.
And I've said this on stage, that you actually already have influencers on the payroll. They're called employees, and they want to talk about your brand. Now, not everyone is going to be on stage talking about their company. It's not right for everyone. But the other end of the spectrum, nor do I expect the PR team to say, please retweet this press release, and everyone has got to do it. It just doesn't work that way. But if you empower your employees to have a voice and they have their own channels, then you'll get the message out there. And this works for recruitment, because I think that recruitment is now a function of marketing.
Absolutely.
So when I look to work for a new company, I'm not going to look at their recruitment pages alone. I might look there and they've got nice pictures. It's an ad. They want me to feel good about the company. I'm going to look at someone on LinkedIn or on Twitter that works there and see what they talk about. Are they always unhappy? Are they talking about their company, or they're not talking about it? That will tell me whether they're an advocate for the organization and what it would be like to work there.
Yeah.
And guess what? Customers do that too. And if a customer goes to your Twitter handle and it's full of complaints, they expect that you'll get lots of things wrong. But if it's full of messages and affirmations from your own people, then I think that really goes a long way. Another example, I spoke at a conference in London a couple of years ago, room full of marketers, 300 marketers, and I was actually talking about this very notion. And my very last slide simply said, you've just watched a 20-minute ad for IBM. And the audience sat back and they went, yeah, we have, haven't we? We didn't pitch, we didn't get sold a product. We were given some thought leadership. We were given some actionable things to go away, and we know where this guy works. Wow. If Andrew's there, they must have lots of other people like him as well. We should go and check them out. So I think, again, you bring yourself to work, and the workplace and the company of the future embraces the network. I mean, all these companies that we started at the top of the program talking about that are disruptors, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, they work on the network effect. I can't remember the last time I saw an Uber ad or a Netflix or an Airbnb ad, but I see people talking about it. They use the network effect. Right. And I think executives and leadership teams that understand this will empower their employees, and they'll sit back and the marketing team will go, wow, the leads have increased because we've got our own people talking about why it's such a great company and why we have such great products. It seems simple, but a lot of companies lock it down and they say you can't say things, you can't be out there. I want to work for a company where they encourage me to be on stage. They encourage me to sing the praises of my organization and my fellow colleagues.
But that feels like such a such a sharp edge for so many of those companies
Yeah.
because they're so used to the constraints and the controls
Control. Yeah.
and the signing of a non-disclosure, and you cannot say this and you're not allowed to talk about that. And now suddenly you're saying, hold on a minute, you want me to go on Snapchat and you want me to go on Twitter and you want, oh, no, let's they're backing off from that like it's a bad smell very quickly. Like, no, this is not going to happen. And you and I both said the same thing when we were on stage, is that, listen, you've got to grasp that in a world today where engagement is not a problem, it's a freaking crisis, and loyalty is not a problem, it's a crisis. You got to understand that your resource for new employees and your resource for engaged employees is actually the people who work there already. And if you don't take care of your people, they are going to talk whether you like it or not. They may not.
And
they may have signed something that doesn't let them say a specific thing, but they're still going to let people know. And you're a fool to think that they won't.
And you know where they'll talk? They'll talk on the dark social channels.
Yeah.
They'll talk on Messenger. They'll talk on WhatsApp, the things that can't be measured. And their networks will hear that it's not such a great place to work and I wouldn't work here. So the dark social is something that employers need to worry about. They can't see it, they can't measure it, but it's happening. So Absolutely. Back to the Max Black example, if you have a problem with the company, encourage people to be open and use the internal tools to rectify that. But importantly, with Diane, the CHRO, getting on there and saying, we're listening, we heard you, the message goes out that, hey, it's actually okay to be constructively critical because they're listening and they'll fix it.
Yeah, and I think that is so vitally important that employers get this. But again, it feels like prying the hand off the grip that is so tight.
But you know what? It's generational because the next generation of leaders have this built in. It isn't a case of, are we going to stop social media? It's like, why aren't we all on it? Why isn't the whole board? Why don't we have board meetings on social media?
Yeah.
That could be the extreme that we see when the next generation of managers come in and they will completely change the dynamic.
Yeah, I am certain that dynamic will change. And as I've said before, I mean, I think that, I'm sitting and I'm talking to a leader who is in his 50s or she's in her late 50s, and they'll say, well, I just don't think it's that important. And I go, well, it's not. You're right. It's not that important for you. But my question is, and you heard me talk about this on stage, my question is, do you want to be remembered as a great leader? And they'll say, of course. And I'll say, great. Yeah. So here's the thing. How is your leadership going to be measured? By the profit you brought the company, or about the legacy that you created in a company? And they go, well, I hope both. And I go, yeah, but you're focused on one. You're focused on the profitability, the bottom line. But your actual best way of measuring you as a leader is the legacy you leave behind. How good are the leaders that walk in your steps? Did you step out onto that outer edge to tell them it's okay for you to do that too? If you're not going to step into your own discomfort, then everybody's going to be playing safe. You're setting up an environment, a culture where you're telling people it's important to play it safe. It's important to be rigid. It's important to cling. And even if they're the next generation, they're not going to be as tight and clingy as you are, but you've already conditioned them in that direction, and we got to change that. And that's going to take my generation to do that.
Yeah, and you're dead right, because back to thinking like a startup. Startups don't have the time or the ability to have all these rules. They want to fail fast.
Right.
Now, I'm not going to go out to a bank and say, hey, fail fast. But you know what? Last night I went in London to the opening of a brand new space from Barclays, one of the big banks here. They have basically taken a whole building and probably spent hundreds of millions of dollars fitting it out as an incubator for financial and fintech startups. They've got one in New York. I'm going to have a look at that in a few weeks as well. And I was there last night thinking, this is so not like a bank. Now, I know the CEO, Ashok of Barclays, and I understand his vision. And it's like, okay, we're not going to necessarily make any money tomorrow out of this. But if we don't set the pace, if we don't get first view at these new startups, our competitors will. So here's Ashok and Barclays saying, I'm going to think like a startup. Right. And they've employed people from startups. Tell you one other thing. Richard Branson was once asked, Richard, what do you want your legacy to be? And he quickly fired back, I want people to see what they think of my children. So going even beyond the workplace, he wants to be known for what people think of his children, how he brought them up, what he taught them, and the values that he taught them. I think that was a really powerful statement.
Yeah, and I think that, in the context of being a leader, whether it's dealing with disruption or just simply leading, and I don't think there's anything simple about it, but it is, the best analogy that I have used from the stage is that I knew what it meant to be a leader. I think I was always leading. I was doing things that were leadership, but I don't think I understood what it meant to be a leader. So this is a vast difference. And these were not titles that were given to me. It was simply I took on the leadership role. But I don't think I knew what it meant to be a leader until one particular day, and I delivered a 5-day training. And at the end of that training, people were gracious and they lined up to say thank you. And being me, when people say thank you, that's not okay for me, because I think that a lot of that is niceness. It's gracious and I'm grateful for it, but it's obligatory. It doesn't really have any depth.
Yeah,
so when people say thank you to me, my question is always, for what? I want you to be specific. Tell me for what. Because the reason I like it is because it makes the person stop and go, oh yeah, what exactly? Like they feel grateful, but for what specifically? And so this lady stood in front of me, long line of people, gracious and kind, and she stood in front of me and she said, I want to thank you. And I said, that's great, for what? And she said, and she stopped and she paused and she said, for my grandchildren. And I went,
wow.
That's interesting. I think she was like mid-40s. I said, you don't look old enough to be a grandma. She goes, I'm not. But over there, that's my daughter. She's here too, and she's pregnant. Early stages, but she's pregnant. And I said, so I still don't understand how you're thanking me for your grandchildren. She says, because what I've learned from you will impact my relationship with my daughter. It will impact my daughter's relationship with my grandchild. It will impact my relationship with my grandchild. And it will impact my grandchild with their children. I want to thank you for my grandchildren and my grandchildren. And it was at that moment that I got what leadership is. Yeah. Leadership is not the impact that I have today. It's the impact, the impact, the influence that I have as the pond ripples. It's what goes out into the world long after I'm gone, because I'm certain, and I feel good about it, that woman's grandchildren will probably never know my name. And that's what leadership is. It's that looking, as you say, to being a futurist about yourself and the practicality of it today. I can't think about how can I change this woman's grandchildren, but I can be, how can I be really present for that person and serve them, that it impacts that person's grandchildren. And that's what I like about what you're saying, Andrew, is that this understanding of you got to step up, and you may not be the recipient of the applause. It may come the next generation of employees. It may come the next generation of leaders, and it may come the next generation of customers. It's powerful stuff. I love what you're saying there. It's really important.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? As looking into this futurist thing, one of the things you talked about was the gig economy. When we shared the stage, you talked about the gig economy. I don't know that too many C-suite people, I certainly know entrepreneurs get it, and we have a lot of entrepreneurs who watch our show, but help the C-suite individuals understand what a gig economy is.
Well, I actually didn't know what the gig part really meant until fairly recently. I looked it up. It's like, why is everyone calling it the gig economy? It's when you've got a gig, you've got a job. And there's the rise of the freelancer. And so if you look at someone who drives an Uber taxi or someone that is renting out an Airbnb, they're essentially freelancing. They're not employed. They're not on the clock. And that is a different relationship.
Right.
But I think what we also need to understand is, regardless of the brand behind the group that you work for or work with, is that a lot of people are going to choose, self-employment because it's easier. You don't have to conform to a whole lot of rules. But it might be that as we see the next generation of people come to work, they may choose that they want to have more of a flexible relationship with their employer. It might mean that we employ more people part-time. And that comes with a whole lot of issues. And what I've seen happen even in the last few years is that the whole notion of, working for an Uber, an Airbnb, or those sort of companies, it allows you to be your own boss, but it also means that you're relying on one company to get you work. And I'm wondering whether in the future we'll actually have multiple jobs, that the skills that I have, let's assume that I hang up my hat at IBM and I just became a public speaker. In fact, like what you do, you have many, many clients, you have many, many jobs actually, and you roll on to one and roll off the next. And I think a lot of people will be doing that because they can, because technology now allows you to link a need to someone who can fulfill that need. TaskRabbit's a great example. And, I've never actually used it, but one day I think, well, maybe I'll get someone else to do these things that I don't want to do or I'm not great at doing. In fact, I did a podcast with a company the other day, and they said, we're going to send this off, get someone on Fiverr, which is a website for, people that are self-employed, because we're not great at transcribing, and it'll probably cost a few tens of dollars, and it'll be done in a couple of days. And I thought, here's a startup actually employing people in another startup to get their job done. And so I think the nature of work may not be you'll have the huge companies. You'll still need huge companies like banks and airlines to run things and have infrastructure. But I think work will get done by a different breed of person, and technology will enable that. So, you can set up your website, you can take payment using all these other services run by other companies to make your life a lot easier. So when you say, to an executive, this new gig economy, they need to start thinking about, well, can they benefit from a flexible workforce, or can they get extra skills on demand when they need things done? Just as cloud computing allows you to dial up a server overnight, or less than overnight, in seconds, when you need more demand for your web services, could you dial up employees? But then the challenge is what we've been talking about. How do you then have loyalty? Because if they don't work for you, how do you keep them loyal? And if they don't like you, just as you can rate someone negatively or poorly on the Uber app, that means that I thought the other day, here's a different analogy. So when we go to a hotel and we're about to go out, we probably drop our towels on the floor knowing that someone else will clean them up. People that use Airbnb, though, don't do that, because we actually rate the people that stay there as well as the person who's the host. And so you make damn sure that you hang the towels up, or they'll give you a lower rating. And I think if this whole gig economy is driven on recommendations and rating and influence, I think we may even get better quality of service. Because if I'm allowed to rate the provider and the provider's allowed to rate me as a customer, I think that will completely change the dynamic. And back to your opening line, I think people who run organizations need to be aware of this, because more and more of this is going to happen. And so when I can rate you and you can rate me, I think you have an expectation of a much higher level of service from both sides.
I was actually going to take you into that, and I'm so glad you got to that, because I think that this is one of the things that we're missing. I interviewed Shane Green recently of Culture Hacker, and one of the things we talked about was there's this perceived war for talent, and the answer is the talent won.
Yeah, you're right.
So the idea, and so what we talked about, the idea that you are interviewing this potential employee is a really foolish concept. What you really need to grasp is they're interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them. And so when a company will say to me, well, they came in, they stayed a week, and they walked away, like I talked about when you and I did that interview with it. Why did they leave? They only came to the reception. Why did they even go? Because you're not thinking beyond that you're offering them a job. No, they're also offering you their services. And I actually love that idea of the mutual rating, because I think it also, for leaders, it makes you aware. It makes you pay attention to, I'm just having a bad day. It's fine. Everybody has a bad day. But you have to own that, not wait for it to show up in a rating, which is going to happen. And in this gig economy piece where, we're working with a team right now, the patriarch, it's a multi-generational business. And the patriarch is in his 70s. He doesn't want to give one of the executive team members a raise because they're not there full time.
Wow.
Because in his head, you're a part-time worker. Because that's the world he came from. Instead of understanding this person is there part-time on premises, but actually works more than 40 hours a week, because he's a salary worker, but he works more than 40 hours a week. He just doesn't live in the same city. So he actually flies in and spends a certain amount of days at the office and a certain amount of days not in the office. And trying to have that old-style leader grasp, it isn't about the amount of time your bum's in the chair in a physical property. That is quite the feat, even for someone like me to get it across.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about, mate. You're not paying for the amount of time and the evidence of that is when you have a 70% disengagement rate of people who are sitting in the office. This is your first clue.
Yeah. And the thing also is that even though we may not be at work on the clock, back to this notion of advocacy, we're always promoting the company by our actions and our words. I mean, me and you more than others because we're out on stage and on podcasts and those sort of things. But I'm always very conscious of what am I saying? What will people think of me? What will people think of my company? And so there are, with these networks now, with the gig economy, there are so many more opportunities for people to see what it's like and the sort of employees that you have. And again, if there was a ratings system, if it's trending down, there's something that needs to be addressed. And, managers love measurements and those sort of things. Maybe if we had some sort of feedback and rating service that they could see on a dashboard, they could see day by day, what's going wrong with my company.
I think for me, that is the future right there. It's one of the big pieces that I think that is just getting, I think it's inevitable, but I don't think anybody's really stepping into it yet. I mean, they recognize things like Glassdoor where employees can go and rate, but it seemed, I think they distanced themselves from it. And in fact, they could do exactly what you suggested, which I recommend. I think it's, again, very good practical futurist, which is don't wait for Glassdoor, create your own. Have one inside of your own organization where if you're seeing consistently that this leader is getting a shitty score as a leader, then, it doesn't mean fire that leader, but it means there's some training, some development, some coaching that needs to take place.
Yeah.
Because very often people are ignorant about their own poor behavior. But having that there, if I read that, 10 of the people I lead say that they're scoring me a 6, I'm kind of going, it kind of sucks. And are they all ganging up on me, poor me? Or am I going to actually step up and go, hold on a sec, let's hold a meeting and zip it and actually just say, tell me what it is, because I'm not getting it. I mean, that can change an entire culture. And that is, as you said, that is the startup mentality inside of a titanic organization. And I think that's a really powerful piece right there.
And the gig economy allows us to have that discussion because even the most seasoned chief executive, he or she probably has used an Uber or something like that, and they know about the rating service. So you can then say, you know what? It's like having an on-demand rating service. Once you've completed the task, how did I do? And they might then get it and go, I see. And if both sides of the equation are scored, you can see how the supplier and the provider are actually doing. And maybe, again, when you say think like a startup and they go, but we're a 100-year-old company, then you give them an example of something they've used. Because another thing I say a lot is that in order to get digital, you have to be digital. You have to play with this technology. So if I had a bunch of chief executives in front of me or a board, I'd get them to do something simple. I'd say, you know what? The task for you next week is to set up a website. I've never done that before. I want you to actually do something. And you know what? When they push the publish button and they see their face on the website, they go, I did that. They go home and tell their family and their friends, hey, look what I did. It's that easy. Yes, it's that easy. Right. They then overcome the fear of what it's about. So you use something, an analogy like that, or you take them through something they've used, some service they've used, and say, how could you deploy that mentality in your own organization to go, I get it. And I have seen so many light bulbs pop up when you've given them something tangible that they've already used. Yeah. That sometimes that's the barrier they need to cut through.
Yeah, and you said something there that I think is important. I think that for many people, the word future is synonymous with the word fear.
Yes.
Right.
Fear of the unknown.
Right, so because it's fear of the unknown, and giving them an opportunity to step into that, it has all kinds of benefits. What's the most practical thing about what you're sharing here for the entrepreneurial leader? What's something that they can really grasp out of this?
I think the techniques are similar, but they have to do it faster. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, I've seen, I've run companies from being the first employee up to 50. So you kind of see, I think the magic number is about 6. Once you get 6 people in the company, you then start having politics and you have HR issues and all those sort of things. So plan this into it. If you're starting a new organization with a few people, plan these things in from day one. Otherwise, at 6 or 10 people, you'll be acting like a big company, even though you've got a few employees, because you'll have the issues because people have issues and suppliers have issues and customers have issues. So think about this from day one. And maybe if you're the only employee, measure yourself. Get into that habit of a practice of doing that so that when the second and third employee comes along, you've got processes in place and then they know that you are going to be, measuring everyone and actually helping each other perform at their best.
Well, that's a great idea. So I'm going to turn the tables on you because I think you would agree that leaders, real leaders, are committed to ongoing growth and development. So
Yep.
what is an area that you are currently working on yourself or in your business so that you're growing and developing?
So my speaking is a good example. I've been speaking professionally since 1999, so for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of years ago, I decided to take it up a notch and actually go from sort of do it yourself to actually getting some advice. And you've actually helped me with some advice as well. I now have an agent, and they're more than just a speaking agent who books me speaking gigs. They're a coach. And so just as if I was an athlete, I would have to train every day. I would want to beat my personal best every single time. And so I've set myself a mission to become the best speaker I can possibly be every time I speak and get better and better each time. So what do? And you've seen it. I lug a video camera around the world. I have a small consumer camera and a radio microphone, and I video every one of my presentations for 2 reasons. One, I watch them back and I'm super, super critical. That worked well, that didn't work well, I should have said something differently. And just as the athlete trains and practices every day, I rehearse and train and practice. And the second reason I video them is so that people like you can see them and see what you're going to get. So I've decided that one of the areas that I actually enjoy, I have a passion for speaking and for teaching. I just want to be the best possible presenter that I can be. And I don't think I've reached my peak yet. And every time I go on stage, I get nervous like you and others do, but I come off going, you know what, that wasn't so bad. And back to one of the points you say, people come up to me and say, that was great. And even when I think I've done a really bad job, they say the same thing. So I say to them a little bit different to what you say. I say, what are the 2 things that you're going to take back to the office next week? Mm-hmm. And they all go, that's a good question. It tells me 2 things. One, were they listening and did they actually get it? But secondly, I learn more from them than they'll ever learn from me because I understand, I road test some of my ideas on the audience and I see whether they will land. So long-winded answer to your question, but I just want to become a great communicator because even if I'm on stage in front of 1,000 people or in front of a team of 6, I want them to know that I'm communicating as effectively as I can, and I'm also listening and I'm taking that on board and I'm improving who I am and how I lead every time.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Really, a really great answer. I believe, again, I always pre-frame this question by saying, I believe it's not the truth. It's just what I believe in my observation. That the most successful people I've ever met, and that's not limited to money, but the most successful people I've met are all a bit obsessive. We're obsessed with something, and I say, there's a movie about it. You have to watch that movie, and it's the part of the movie there's just a part in the movie, and it's the part you have to talk about. There's a show about it you have to watch. There's a book or a magazine you have to read it. It's a conversation you can't resist jumping in, even if it's with people you don't know. What are you obsessed with?
Yeah.
What are you?
What am I obsessed with? What am I obsessed with?
What's your obsession? What do you get pulled into that you just can't resist?
I just like knowing what the next thing is out there. I try and play with technology. I try and be an early adopter. I drive my family crazy because I always have to have the newest gadget. But why? I want to understand what's going to happen in the future. And the way to predict the future is actually being at the front, being the early adopter. So I joined LinkedIn in 2004. I was on Twitter in 2007. I try and be a really early adopter and obsess to try and understand how things work.
As the little quick sidebar there, but the interesting thing about being an early adopter is there's so many things to adopt now. This is part of what creates a lot of confusion with people. I mean, there's a new platform. I hear about a new platform. I mean, I'm not even in your world, and I hear about at least one platform a week. This sounds like a good one. Somebody says, have you tried Anchor? Yeah, okay, I'll try Anchor. Whatever it is. And I'm jumping on all these different things, and it's like, yeah, you know what? I've also got to go, where can I, because otherwise my brain will explode. So it's interesting that that's an interesting obsession for you. So one of my favorite questions to ask people is this. You only get one. You only get one small space for this. Maybe there's two things on there, but on that small space, what do you want them to put on your gravestone more than anything?
He cared.
He cared. Why does that matter?
It matters because I care about people deeply, and I care about how I come across. And I know all the time I let people down. But I would want people to know that he actually took the time to listen and understood, and he cared. And I've had people in my team say, look, the reason I joined this company is because of you. And that's very, very humbling. And it's a huge responsibility to live up to, because someone has changed employers, changed jobs because of me. And I know way back early in my career, I thought, if I run a project team, yes, every week we have an update, but I'll start the update by asking them what they did in the weekend. And so I remember this guy, John Lynn, on my project team back in Optus in Sydney. I found out that he liked to sail. And a funny thing happened. Everyone came to my project meetings on time because they enjoyed being there. They enjoyed the fact that I cared about what they were doing, and I knew their families' names and what they did on the weekend. And people that had run the project before me hadn't cared. It was just a job. Yeah. We spend more time at work with people that aren't our family. You've got to really enjoy what you're doing. But I think also, and an attribute of a senior manager, does he or she care? I think deep down they have to. Yeah. Because if you become robotic and just become a manager rather than a leader, I think people won't want to work for you or with you. So, yeah, I'd like them to say that he cared.
Yeah, that's very cool, mate. That is very cool. I'm going to put you on the spot here and take it out of the practical for a moment. Mm-hmm. What do you see as one of the next big things that's coming that you just think is going to rattle a lot of cages?
So I've been playing with this whole notion of blockchain. You would have heard of Bitcoin, which is the cryptocurrency that runs on blockchain. Yeah. I think it will fundamentally disrupt multiple industries. Give you a couple of quick examples. The legal profession. You can now have things called smart contracts, where essentially computers are negotiating low-level contracts with each other. That removes the whole layer of conveyancing, for example, from property and those sort of things. At the moment, if you want to transfer money between banks around the world, it can take hours or days. They've actually done tests. The National Australian Bank in Australia sent currency overseas on Bitcoin in 10 minutes. Why 10 minutes? There's a whole structure around why that is. But why can't we transfer currency in 10 minutes? And I think blockchain will fundamentally disrupt whole organization. Another quick example. I'm a wine manufacturer, and I want to prove that when you're buying a $100 bottle of wine, where the grapes were sourced from. And I can actually use a blockchain, which is a distributed ledger, to trace that bottle of wine back to the grapes in the ground. When you think beyond that, I think there are going to be fundamental changes to whole business processes, because there are multiple variants of the truth. And I know that banks, and Barclays is one of them, that's why they've set up this incubator, is to test this and see, well, what can we do? Can we make the banking process more efficient? So if I'm taking out a home loan, there's a computer somewhere that says, well, you're going to need to change the gas and the water and all those other things. You're going to need finance. You're going to need insurance. That's all done automatically. And that could be organized through things like a blockchain. So technically, the blockchain, I think, is very interesting. But I think and when I give these examples across different industries, people go, I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
If they haven't thought about it, someone else has.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, mate. Listen, this has been great. I've really enjoyed having you on the show. It's always awesome for you and I to get to chat, and now we get to let other people earwig, as we like to say.
Yeah, if only we'd had the video going in the taxi, it would have been a very different, very different podcast. But look, I really enjoy your company, Dov. I'm glad that we met in person, and I look forward to sharing a stage with you again very, very soon.
Thank you, mate. I do. I look forward to it too. Tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you, potentially bringing you in to speak or having you consult with them.
Really simple. I've set up andrew.london. No .com. It's andrew.london. It's my name and where I live. Everything about me you can find on there. You can look at my speeches. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'd appreciate that, at Andrew Grill, Grill.
Andrew.London. Fabulous. Well, it's been great having you here. This has been, like I said, very insightful. I know people are going to get a lot out of it. And as I say to you all the time, viewers, listeners, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. But as always, don't just listen. Apply it.
Yeah.
Go back, listen 2-3 times. You'll always get more out of it. I promise you on that. Remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive, that the fastest growing companies often hit the point where they realize that they're spending a fortune attracting and even training and developing people, and then those people are leaving them at an alarming rate. If you are sick of investing in training and developing and getting your talent, only to have them leave you before you can get that return on your investment, reach out to me at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets within inside of your organization. And as a result, we can reduce that employee turnover by as much as 20 to 80% in as little as 120 days. So this is vitally important. Full Monty Leadership, providing you the concrete soft skills to get your organization to the top and keep you there, because you can't outsource authenticity. This is Dov Barron, fullmontyleadership.com, reminding you to get yourself over to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, where you can go through the self-assessment test for whether you are following the 5 categories of authentic leadership, find out how well you're doing in those and strengthen them. Just get yourself over there. Again, Matrix, like the movie, matrix.fullmontyleadership. Till next time, this is Dov Barron, Full Monty Leadership, and I am out.